Okay. Okay, so we're looking at your lesson on characteristics of functions. Talk to me about the functions that you're going to be looking at.
So in this lesson, the three functions we're going to look at are exponential and linear and quadratic functions. All functions that we've discussed this year to this point.
So what are you looking for in the lessons that you want the students to achieve? So what is the goal?
So the goal of the lesson is for kids to have an average. There's 21 questions total over just release questions over the different functions. They want to score at a high average on those 21 questions. And we're given zones like 10, higher than 10. Some of them will score, we'll say like higher than others. But we're given zones. I'm giving a realistic goal for this lesson around 14. That's 66%. So
14 out of 21?
14 out of the 21 is kind of where I want kids to be.
Is this mixing the functions
Altogether, yeah.
and those are the exponential, linear, and quadratic?
All questions, all 21 cover all three.
Okay.
Yes. And the lesson includes a debrief on all the vocabulary before. So there's a direct teach right before they do the practice.
Okay. And so you talked about you wanted them to get 14 out of 21 questions, but what is the learning? What part of, like, what characteristics should they know
So
for each one of for these functions?
So the idea behind the questions cover things like intercepts, x-intercepts, y-intercepts. In the direct teach, we review a lot. We review a lot of that. So they get a little. They're going to get a little review over it first, and then after the review is given, they take that the knowledge to show what they know in the practice that follows. So the x-intercepts, the y-intercepts, things that parts of the quadratic graph, like the max and min, the axis of symmetry, I call it the characteristics of it, all the critical values, all the things that we have touched upon. I just compose questions that hit those, that talk about those vocabulary words that we've discussed.
So is this a review that you're doing? So you've already, because you talked about
Yes.
they're given like a review before they take it.
So
they've already done.
Yes,
these?
sir.
Okay.
Yep. So this is in preparation for their state exam, and this is this lesson is going to happen after they have prior knowledge to going before the activity.
So what are you comparing the results against? So what kind of data do you have? Once you get these results, what are you comparing it to?
So we have we have our map data. Our map data is what we're using at this point because it's the freshest in the kid's mind. My kids scored low in this area when it comes to linear functions, and they scored high when it comes to the same type of vocabulary dealing with quadratic. So I thought it would be good to kind of see how does that affect their question bank answering on linear stuff, and maybe connecting the vocabulary will help do that. But I will use I know which section has what out of that 21. I'll be able to break down, they did poor on linear stuff before. How did this activity affect their understanding of the same vocabulary after the activity's done?
So you talk about how they haven't done as well on the linear functions.
Mm-hmm.
So these questions that you have, is it equally distributed, or are you going to have more linear stuff because that's what they didn't do well on, or how are the questions divided, or is it just, do you create the test?
Well, we
Or
did
is
it
it-
as our team.
Okay.
Our team has made it. There are questions over each one.
Mhm.
I can't. When I think of the number in my head, there's a focus on linear because we all know that linear and quadratics are the large point of the test. So I don't think we weighed the, the assignment, the activity as the number based on the data. So we didn't do that but there is a high number. There's at least 10. I know that there's 10 of linear and then 10 that go with quad and exponential.
Okay, so you do have more where they're struggling the most, so you can see what they're missing. Because I just think sometimes a good question to ask when you're doing these is, and it kind of goes when you're having students do mastery as well. Should they really, if you're going to do a retake on something, should you focus on the things that they didn't do well on, or are you just giving them a whole new test that covers the stuff that they did well on?
Yeah.
So, I mean, are you looking at the overall score, or are you looking at the components where they did not do well? And it looks like what you say is you're focusing more on the
linear side.
on the linear side than you are, which is probably which is definitely the reason you want to go. How do the students know that? How will the students know, if I were one of your students, how will I know that I have, that I've been successful in that lesson? Like, what kind of evidence of the learning, like, what are you looking for on that, and how do the students know that they were successful in the lesson?
So the structure of the lesson will allow kids to do some independent practice over the 21 questions. I assume some will do more than others, and that's kind of where my mind is. Like, I know some of my students will be able to do all 21. There's not a lot of computation to the question, so 21 is reasonable in the amount of time, but there will be some that need more. So the way that I'm going to say it to them is, there's out of the 21, I'm going to give them a score based on how many they get right. So that'll tell them based off of what they saw, then the more I get right, the more I understand. But I also am going to, I put the linear stuff at the front. It's the first 10. So I kind of get a feeling of where they are on the most important stuff. Now that you've mentioned it, I think like actually it works out that way.
Yeah.
But the first 10 are over linear, so it will work out to where the stuff that we really focus on, even if a kid was able to do 10 in the amount of time that's provided, I can still get a gist of like how did they take to the material. But all 21, they'll be able to know an average based off of like, I got 12 out of 21. And I did all the questions, or I've done this before last year with other students that they could get 19 out of 21. So that told them I really understand this concept, and that they'll leave the period and understanding like how I can take the vocabulary into actual test questions.
And they'll know, like, for each one, like for linear, exponential, and quadratic, how they did on each section.
Yes,
right?
we're gonna. So the goal is to finish it on the first day, and then I'm gonna follow up with students about like how it's broken down by each, which will kind of add on to the lesson.
So are the questions more related to reading a graph, or is it notation? Like, for example, if you ask for an x-intercept,
so
are they finding that on the graph, or are they like gonna say like the coordinate, where they know that the y value is the 0 or whatever, or is it a mix of both?
So the focus on this one deals with high focus on the graph. Like, what does it look like? We do talk about. I am going to talk about. There are questions where you do get points, but the focus is how can you answer questions based off of understanding what you know about the characteristics of the graph. Like, some of the questions that include those, we talk about with the kids after when we go over it. I'm planning to show like, well, this one deals with points, but how can I use the wording and what I know about the function to come up with the correct answer? So we're going to talk about things like that. So how you can get those, what some of my colleagues would call like a higher level question, how can they answer the higher level question with the basic understanding of the vocabulary?
And in a previous conversation that we had, that was what they struggled on the most, is how to interpret graphs and how to read the graphs. So
we have graphing on the calculator. We have questions that give a graph. We have questions that have kids draw a graph. So they have different forms of using the graph to get the answer.